A story that happened in Hollywood. A high school English teacher who taught for 28 years, then devoted himself to real estate at the age of 52, and had traveled to more than 90 countries by the age of 82. His life was fruitful with a successful career, but he never married. That's because he had a peculiar affection for male criminals, which led to his tragic death at home. So, what happened that year? Hello. Welcome to the Crime Documentary Files channel. Let's go back to 2014 and walk you through the case. Hollywood is located in the northwest of Los Angeles, California, on the west coast of the United States. It is the center of the global music and film industry, holding the world's top entertainment industry and luxury brands, leading and representing the highest level of the international fashion industry. Numerous film industry titans gather here, and the Academy Awards ceremony is held here every year. Nowadays, the word Hollywood has become a symbol of the American film industry and the people who work within it. Harry Major, a former English teacher at Hollywood High School, was responsible and disciplined throughout his 28-year career. Most of the students he taught spoke highly of him, but his left arm and hand were born disabled, which might have been caused by his mother taking thalidomide for nausea during her pregnancy. He always puts his left hand in his pocket, and he doesn't like to be photographed, so he's rarely seen in school publications. In 1984, at the age of 52, Harry felt that the atmosphere in the school was getting worse, and the students were becoming more and more disobedient. On top of that, the head teacher actually asked him to teach 6 classes at the same time. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. In a fit of anger, he quit. After he left his job, he started flipping houses, making a lot of money through buying and selling, and he traveled around for the next 30 years. As of 2014, he has been to more than 90 countries. On February 5, 2014, 82-year-old Harry lived alone in a small apartment near Sunset Boulevard. In his spare time, he often went to the elderly activity center to kill time, drink tea, and chat with his old friends. On this day, he met an old friend, Joseph, at the center, and he talked about what he's been experiencing recently. A few days ago, the 2 men who lived in his apartment were bickering every day, which was very annoying. Fortunately, they had gone, and the house was finally quiet again. According to Harry's neighbors, people often came to stay at Harry's house, but no one knows who these people were. But the neighbors have become more and more used to that. At about 7 p.m., on February 12, 2014, the landlord of Harry's rented apartment received a phone call. The caller said that they had made an appointment to have lunch with Harry today, but Harry didn't turn up and couldn't be reached. Worried that something had happened to Harry, they hoped that the landlord could go to the apartment to have a look. The landlord agreed and went to the apartment with an acquittal. They knocked for a while, but no one was answering, so the landlord used the spare key and felt unsettled as soon as he entered the house. The apartment was a mess, and Harry was a very clean person who would arrange the cans and bottles in his kitchen in a neat, alphabetical order. No one was found in the living room and kitchen, so they went straight to the master bedroom and opened the door. They sensed the bad smell as soon as the doors been opened, and saw Harry lying nearly naked in the bathroom of the room and wasn't breathing. The police blocked off the scene, and after inspection, they found that Harry had been dead for days. The door going into the apartment has not been forcibly opened. Bloodstains and multiple blood prints that looked like shoe prints were found in the living room, kitchen, stairwell, and other places. There was a rope in the toilet, and preliminary autopsy results showed that the time of death was February 10th, and the cause of death was asphyxia. The murder weapon was most likely a belt. People who knew Harry said that he has never married and has always lived alone. Shortly before he was killed, he asked friends not to arrange any funerals and to simply throw his ashes into the ocean after he passed away. Harry was kind and generous to his friends and never made enemies with others. Though he supported atheism and gay rights in communities, these views shouldn't have warranted a murder. So who would do this to an 82-year-old man? Luz Briseno, who lived next door to Harry, told police that she saw him almost every day and last saw him on February 8th. But on February 10th, a strange thing happened, which she remembered very well. At 10 o'clock that morning, she was rushing for work and was washing up in a hurry in the bathroom when she heard a loud bang coming from Harry's next door. Her bathroom shares the same wall as Harry's apartment, and she thought Harry had slipped in the bathroom. So she was shouting through the wall, "Are you all right? What's going on?" No one answered for a long time, and out of worry, she was going to go to Harry's to check on him, but no one answered the door. While she was contemplating calling the police, a voice that sounded like a female said that Harry was not at home and that he had gone to the store to buy something. Luz was still worried and asked again, "What happened? Is everything all right?" The person behind the door responded, "Fine. Everything is fine." And Luz was in a hurry to go to work, so he left without asking further. But thinking about it now, it was very weird. Joseph, an old friend of Harry's, said, "I saw two white men talking with him when I passed his apartment on February 1st. 4 days later, I met Harry at the activity center, and he told me that the two men who lived with him were always fighting. But that day, Harry also said that they were all gone. Harry was rich and wasn't capable of defending himself, so it isn't entirely impossible that people staying at the apartment had the idea to murder for money." Investigators found a phone with a contact named Scott Porter on it, but strangely, all the friends around him said they didn't know the man. Just when the investigation was in limbo, Harry's best friend Dale Rouse discovered a secret about Harry, and the truth has since been revealed. Harry had no relatives, and he entrusted all his possessions to his friend Dale, who was sorting out Harry's belongings. He accidentally found a pile of letters and some photos in his cabinet. These letters have one thing in common. They are all correspondences from prisoners in various prisons in the United States. Harry has been looking for male pen pals in prisons for decades, and most of the people he kept up correspondence with were serious criminals. He only became long-term pen pals with male prisoners, who he had good conversations with. But this relationship is not innocent, as they were affectionate, flirtatious, and mostly sexual. The pictures in the letter were all of naked men. Even as the best and most trusted friend, Dale is not aware of this situation. Police found a letter signed by Scott Porter from Marcy Prison in New York in the pile of letters. The investigators quickly got in touch with the prison and learned that the man named Scott has the real name of Scott Cratlian. He dropped out of high school and has been on the streets since. In 1992, he was arrested for burglary in Orange County, New York, and in the same year, he was sentenced to 25 years for murder. During his time in prison, he became a pen pal with Harry because of a soap called General Hospital, which lasted for more than 10 years. On November 26, 2013, 46-year-old Scott was released on parole. Before he was released, Harry had repeatedly said in letters that he wanted Scott to come to Los Angeles and live with him, and he said he was willing to give a sum of money for him to travel. In fact, whenever Harry learned that a pen pal would be released from prison, he would contact them in advance and offer a sum of money or the fare to his home on the condition that they would have sex with him. Many prisoners would choose to live in his home for a period of time after they are released from prison, because many of them are felons who have been in prison for decades. When they've just been released from prison, they are already quite old and may not adapt to society very well, or they have nowhere to go. Facing these challenges, a lot of them were willing to exchange sex for some money. Even though some of the prisoners were not gay, the police initially suspected that Harry had been killed by taking the felons who had just been released from prison to his home again and again, not only providing food and accommodation, but giving them pocket money so generously, which may have triggered the greed of some of them. Neighbor Rouse also said that Harry often had some strange visitors who looked like criminals. One of them often came in the middle of the night, and he was drunk every time. This surveillance video shows two white men in the parking lot downstairs of the apartment just a few days before the crime, which were the two men Joseph saw. One of them was Scott, and the other is James DiRocco. James was easier to find, as he was taken into custody after leaving Nevada in violation of his parole. James, 54, served 17 years in a Nevada prison for robbing a store. During his imprisonment, he saw an advertisement from Harry to find a same-sex pen pal, and they kept correspondence for more than 10 years. The first time he talked to Harry after he was released from prison was in 2009. James said, "Harry was very generous to me. He would tell every prisoner who came to his house that if he wanted food and shelter, he had to have sex with him. Harry also did what he could to help those who have been in prison like me. For example, he wanted Scott to go to college and was even willing to pay for it." When the police officer asked James if he knew where Scott was, James said angrily, "In January 2014, I came to Harry's apartment in Hollywood to stay for a while. At the end of the month, Scott, who had just come out of prison, also came, and Scott and I really couldn't get along. Scott was at Harry's when I left, and I don't know where he went after that." James went on to say, "We often argued about really trivial things, and Scott always said that the sound of me playing poker with Harry affected his sleep, and that I liked to raid the fridge and keep him hungry, but he played poker with Harry a lot more than I did. Not only did he borrow money from Harry, he also stole from him. We had a big fight about it, and he said I was spying on him. I was so angry that I called him a fat gay, and he grabbed me by the neck and put me against the wall, and he shouted and threatened me, saying that he was a murderer. Don't I know that he can kill me? Every night after this, I would sleep with a chair at the door in case Scott came in the middle of the night to retaliate. Early in the morning of February 5th, I asked Harry to drive me to the station so I could go home. When I left, I repeatedly told Harry that Scott was dangerous and to be careful of him. But at that time, Harry just replied lightly, saying I didn't need to worry about that. Back in Nevada, Harry and I were calling almost everyone, but he stopped responding 3 days later. It was verified that James never returned to Hollywood after leaving Harry, so his suspicion was ruled out. Scott, who left New York City in violation of his parole, is still missing, and the police have listed him as an important suspect. The Los Angeles Police Department and the FBI formed a task force to track Scott's whereabouts. The police found that after Harry's murder, his credit card had been used many times. The police soon found the person who stole the credit card, and the person was Scott. According to Harry's friends, Harry was really smart, and although he was rich, he lived frugally and planned well financially. No matter how generous he was, there was no way that he would give away his credit card for Scott to use frivolously. On February 18, 2014, 8 days after Harry was killed, Scott was arrested by the task force at a mental hospital north of Los Angeles. He said during trial that around the end of January, he arrived in Los Angeles at Harry's invitation and was really excited that he would finally meet his pen pal of more than a decade in real life. But the reality was very different from what he expected. He found that Harry was completely different from what he had imagined. Although Harry had never said his age, he always thought that he should be around 60 years old, but he was 82 years old, more than 30 years older than Scott. There was also another man living in Harry's home, and it turned out that he was not the one for Harry. The huge gap between his expectations and reality left him feeling resentful. Scott also said he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder while in prison. This condition is classified by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders as a personality disorder and requires the patient to take medication regularly. This time in Los Angeles, he had not taken medicine for several days, and he was worried that he would get sick. So after James left, he went to the mental hospital by car and took the initiative to tell the doctor about his illness. After 2 days in the hospital, he returned to Harry's. On February 9th, he said he wanted to talk about him choking James and stealing money, but they ended up having a big argument. The next day, around 11 a.m. on February 10th, he left Harry's house with his luggage, and Harry gave him a bit of money. The CCTV footage downstairs also showed that Scott did carry a rucksack and leave the apartment at about the same time that day. Scott went on to say that he had been staying in Los Angeles because he wanted to make more money and go back to New York, but he was worried that the medicine prescribed by the hospital would not work and that he would fall ill any time, so he lived in a mental hospital again. However, many people believe that Scott staying in a mental hospital was a trick to avoid the police after committing the crime. This was probably influenced by the movies and TV shows of that period. At that time, there would be clips in movies and shows showing that even if there were patients suspected of committing crimes, the hospital would not disclose any information about the identity of the patient to the police. So it gave the impression that institutions like mental hospitals are good places for criminals to hide. Soon enough, it was found that Scott's story had flaws. After his arrest, the police found that his right forearm was bruised by a rope, and blood extracted from the toe of the tennis shoes he was wearing was tested to be consistent with Harry's DNA, and the sole pattern is consistent with the footprints left at the scene. When the police showed him footage of him using Harry's credit card, he admitted using Harry's credit card, but did not admit to killing Harry. But even with the inconsistent evidence, Scott was still accused of murdering 82-year-old Harry. The trial was deemed to be challenging without direct evidence, and the final result came after several rounds of court debates. Scott changed his testimony at the trial, saying that Harry questioned him about the money after James left on February 5th, and asked him to move out immediately, so he left on bad terms. On February 10th, he wanted to borrow some money from Harry. At that time, something unpleasant happened at Harry's, and they had a fight that had Harry's nose bleeding, and that's probably where the blood on his shoes came from. But Harry was alive and well when he left. Scott's lawyer also repeatedly stressed that no one saw his client commit murder on the day the deceased was killed, and the blood on his shoes doesn't prove he's the killer. The prosecutor argued that on the day of the crime, Luce, the next-door neighbor, heard a loud noise and went to Harry's house to check, and she heard a female behind the door saying that Harry was not at home and went to the store to buy things. But through checking the CCTV footage from around the apartment, it showed that Harry did not go out at all on that day, and he hasn't been seen since that day, so there's no doubt that the loud noise was made by the murderer. It was Scott who was using a female voice at that time, because James once said that Scott was very feminine. He sometimes sounded like a woman, but if he changed his voice a bit, he sounded like a man. After Harry was killed, he took Harry's credit card and had a fight with the cashier when he was at a 7-Eleven. This video shows that his voice is very high-pitched when he's arguing. If you can't see him, it's easy to think that it's an angry woman talking. The prosecutor compared Scott's murder in 1992 to Harry's case. The two cases are highly similar in terms of victim characteristics and modus operandi. Both victims were about 40 years older than Scott when they were killed, and both were killed in the bathroom. They were both tied up before they were killed, and they were all nearly naked and strangled with belts and so on. From this, we can see that there was a heated argument between the two men on the day of the crime. The exasperated Scott chose to murder Harry in the same way he did 20 years ago. Only Scott could have committed two very similar crimes. On November 18, 2015, 21 months after the crime, the jury made a final verdict that Scott was guilty of murdering 82-year-old Harry, and he was sentenced to 56 years in prison. Even though he has been crying out for injustice, he is doomed to be imprisoned for a second time. Harry Major's story is a sobering reminder of the risks involved in trusting too readily and not prioritizing personal safety. By staying vigilant, setting clear boundaries, and building supportive communities, we can reduce the likelihood of similar tragedies. Well, that's today's story. If you like my videos, you can like and subscribe through the little bell below, and then you won't miss any of my videos. See you next time.